Yo, 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 what is going on, CoD Familia? It is your boy, BN. Today, we are going to be breaking down an interesting and slightly dramatic storyline from SOS 3-2. Now, this is the second strongest KVK group from the Gen 1 kingdoms that makes up one of the first 9, or within that first 9 batch of KVKs from SOS 3-1 up to -9. Now, in this group, we have BDO, DBB, SSG, and WGL, or 41, 81, 229, 286. They are going up against NA, LAW, LTS, YBD, or 30, 119, 134, and 232. Now, you can see at the moment that in the final zone here of Colonstantal, however that sounds, the victory has already been decided. Now, what's interesting about this KVK and why there is a little bit of spice going on is because of, one, this is one of the 8 KVKs out of 9 that basically ended within the first day. Like, things were just pretty much decided. And there were some words that Chisgule shared in a recent video, and we're going to play just a couple clips. I'm going to show you some actual data on how the matchups looked after Greatest Heights and Brink of War finished. So this would have been before Zone 2 PvP started. And then I reached out to a few alliances in this kingdom so I could ask how the other side felt about it, because apparently NA did not participate and fight right away in the final zone, but did participate for however long hours after, or a decent period of time after, from what was reported and mentioned to me. And I'm going to share with you some of those responses as well. So let's start with the first one, which is going to be Chisgule's response. And we're going to play you 3 clips here, starting with the beginning.
And talk about my experience in the brand new season format, which I've really enjoyed. And long story short, we're going to be holding the dragon at the end of the season, which is pretty exciting because honestly, it's been a few seasons where that's been the case. And a part of the reason I was hyped for this Dragonfall season format is the way that allies worked. And I'm not going to rehash that whole thing. I don't think I need to, but I think it stands to reason that now that groups can't hide behind an imbalanced set of allies, then you actually need to make choices about how and when and where you're going to fight. And it's just been really interesting to see the types of choices that different groups make, and we don't need to talk about that any further than that. What I will say is that I have very much enjoyed this format. I would absolutely queue this format again, and I would say of the 3 formats, this is slam dunk the one that I would go for. Now, that said, there's pros and cons to every format, but just to do a quick review of the stats that...
Okay. So a couple of things mentioned there. I think number one, it's pretty much at this point universally recognized that the Dragonfall KVK storyline in Season of Strife has been probably the best variation of KVK thus far in the game's lifespan, because it addresses a number of pain points and asks and really wants overall from the community. And some of those are essentially, and I think probably the number one really, is that you're just giving the opportunity for up to everyone in that KVK, so all the players, all the alliances, all the kingdoms, to make it to the final zone. You, at the same time, because you have alleviated and lifted that worry from players and their kingdoms, it now can incentivize people to go out and arguably fight more in a Zone 2, a Zone 3, because these are now viewed as kind of optional PvP battle zones. It's not something you have to go and do, but you can. And even if you don't, or if you do, you will still be able to make it to the FZ, Zone 4, or the final zone. And so those are kind of, I think, 2 really important points to bring up, because we really haven't had both of those in tandem be prevalent for players that are participating in a KVK. So psychologically, it really does a big positive number, and I believe has a large influence, or can have a large influence, on the overall amount of players that are engaging in PvP and participating. The next one here is about him saying you kind of eliminates or reduces imbalanced teams. That is kind of subjective to a degree, and I say because the only way that you can really ensure the lowest margin of error, and that doesn't mean that it's always going to be perfect, but you can decrease/increase the level of team balance, and maybe within kind of more fairer and not so wide of gaps, is by having more kingdoms in the kingdom pool, as we talked about before. Because if you do this, what it ensures is a higher percentage chance that you will have more teams that are closer in power to each other, therefore having a higher percentage chance of getting closer and more balanced matchups between teams that can now be paired between one another. So instead of potentially having 8 to 10 teams, now you could have 20 to 30 teams. And the more teams you have, the more opportunities for the system to find a more balanced and fair matchup. If we look at, for example, the numbers here on this KVK, we can see that there's a 3-point, and keep in mind, these are the stats after Brink of War Greatest Heights. So in theory, if they were fully healed, not counting for RSS that players have available to them, there would have been about a 4 billion power differential in favor of BDO's team. For kills, you're looking at about 29 bill in favor. You can see here they had almost 260 million more deads on their side. Is that an indicator that more people on their team are willing to incur deads than the other team? I think that's a soft assumption. 12.7 billion heals. Maybe that just means they have the capacity to heal more, or are willing to maybe use more resources. When we look at the numbers that I think are probably the next most important, if not the most, is total 60 mil plus players. They had 66 more. However, keep in mind, you're looking at 610 versus 676. Once you're kind of at that point, 66 isn't, I think, the end of the world when you're talking about a dispersion of 60 mil plus players at that point. However, I do think a big number to me is this 86 number, which is comparing 269 to 183, where they have 86 more 100 mil pluses. The fact is they had more overall power, they had more kills, they had more deads, they had more heals, they had more total 60 mil plus players, and they had more 100 mil plus players. Everything about this KVK screamed advantage BDO's team. I wouldn't say, when you looked at these numbers post Greatest Heights, post Brink of War, pre-Zone 2 fighting, that this was going to be a close KVK. I wouldn't have gone in looking at the data on paper saying, oh, this is going to be close. I would say that this is an uphill battle for the NA side. Does it mean that the battle is unwinnable? No. But do I think that it is a steep battle for them based on how the numbers look? Absolutely. I think that's fair to say. And so, again, when you think about it like that, even when you break down the individual team numbers, right? Look at this. When you looked at the teams based on how the zones are split, if you look at this, the only team that beat out the other teams in any singular category would have been 119-134 versus 41-286. And that would have been in number of 60 mil plus players, 336 to 319, but it still would have been 104 to 151 on 100 mil pluses. Sure, they're close in power. And yes, then the only other situation where they would have beat them out would have been on the power category for 43.54, and that's if they were going up against 81 and 229, right? So it would have been for one of the other zones, but it only would have been on that area. So you're talking, what about 2 columns where it's 1 per one team and 1 versus the other team, and that would have been for the LAWLTS zone? It is. Like, you can just clearly see. Now, again, activity is always going to be a huge part of this because you still have to show up. If that power and your stats and your data of players in your kingdom and the alliances don't show up, then okay, right? You're never going to reach the potential of what the stats are showing you on paper. That's a given. However, I think it's pretty clear, based on how the KVK played out, that you can argue, this is kind of indicative. So now let's look at another one here, which is 456. Now, I think this is probably the dramatic piece here that we're going to share that Chiz states.
Fast. I felt like the pace of this zone was really fun. My only sort of hope in the future is that, more of the kingdoms that showed up to the KVK actually enter into the final zone to fight, but whatever. Folks are going to make their choices, and they are what they are. All right. And I'm not trying to start a bunch of drama there. It just is what it is. So as far as my account goes.
Yeah. He said it without saying it, more or less. And so what he's referring to here is, if we go back in game, what he's talking about is that NA, Nova Avengers, opted to not fight in the final zone. I also got confirmation that they didn't fight in Zone 3. Now, let's read through a mail that was provided to me. And it's funny because I think this was also posted on the official COD Discord on the Gen channel, or even the meme channel, a number of days ago. But let's go ahead and let me show you this. So this is apparently from an alliance mail from NA that states about last zone fighting. Why did we choose to give up Zone 4 fighting? The answer: there is indeed a gap in strength between both sides. In this season, the combat bonuses and opening times in Zone 4 are not favorable for us. The part I would comment on there is that when you say us, keep in mind that you are one part of us. You have 3 other kingdoms that are also a part of us. And so when you say something like us, you are only referring to 25% of your team. I just want to be very clear there, is that it would have been different if, and I say different in the sense of, if, as in more explanation, if they would have said, oh, well, the combat bonuses and opening times in Zone 4 are not favorable for our team of 4 kingdoms, versus the answer here saying favorable for us as in the alliance, us as in the kingdom. Next question. Zone 4 has choke points that we can use to defend and control with bastions. Why don't we give it a try? While Zone 4 does have terrain that we can rely on for defensive positions with bastion, we must consider that even if we defend from that location, it won't have significant strategic implications for the subsequent battles. Instead of wasting our energy on Zone 4, it would be more beneficial to focus on the fights after Pass 5. Now, I would argue that fighting and trying to win Final Zone, even if it's just putting up an initial effort, right? And I'm talking about like the first 24 hours or so, just to see how things would go. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And if you feel like, all right, we're just getting pushed, it's kind of this, it is this uphill battle that we're seeing on paper, and it's playing out like that in real time, then okay. You feel like, you know what, we at least made an effort, we put some time in, but it just doesn't feel like we're at least able to draw a stalemate where strategy and tactics and activity can maybe now play more of an impact on where this is going to go. And if they're just consistently getting pushed and you decide, okay, well, let's just go ahead and call it a retreat, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, right? As long as you're giving an earnest and honest effort up front. It just doesn't appear that that was how this situation played out. And the other thing that I'll say here is if they did end up winning, right, now you're probably able to get more objectives. You can then push into other zones before the season ends. Now you actually have an opportunity to get more out of the season versus kind of taking, whatever the second prize or, ladder prizes would be. The next question, can everyone engage in field battles in Zone 4? We encourage everyone to maintain a constant state of readiness for combat, therefore within a controllable range. You are welcome to enter Zone 4 to harass the enemy. So, essentially saying that you can fight in the final zone and aka indirectly assist your allies, as in other kingdoms, alliances, and players that are on the team, but maybe don't overextend too much, right? That's kind of how I interpret that. Which, in my opinion, the response, I would have maybe liked to see the response here just have been, yeah, you can go out and fight, and you can go and assist any of your teammates or any of the kingdoms that we are teamed with to your heart's content. Right, we're not stopping anyone. We're just not going to give an official order, if you will. Last one. Giving up the fight in Zone 4 does not mean we are giving up on this season. We still have Pass 5 in Zone 2 to defend. We need to continue our efforts even after this season. I hope the defensive spirit of NA can carry on. Remember, we play games to relax and have fun. I hope everyone enjoys the upcoming time in this season. So, and obviously it's probably more the remaining time in this season. However, this to me is just, it is rough, right? I think it's a hard pill to swallow because I don't think that anyone coming into this KVK, especially with the amount of excitement and hype that has been built around it when the map was initially released, along with everyone realizing that the final zone is going to be the crescendo, is going to be the pinnacle fighting in PvP that will hopefully occur in this KVK season. And when you are deprived of that, when that is taken away from you, I can only imagine that's probably not a good feeling. And so I want to share a couple POVs that people were kind enough to reach out to me with. And I want to just talk about a few of those. I want to start with from a player POV. So a player from one of the alliances on the NA team side told me that NA had refused to enter the FZ. We already knew that. It felt as though they didn't fight due to claims that their team could not win. This was reported from some people from NA that posted this in World Chat or Tamara's chat or whatever the KVK chat is. Again, I haven't seen any screenshots. That's just something that was mentioned. The next one is they said that to some, and this is again from a player perspective, it looked to them that NA avoided BDO, as they didn't enter in Zone 3 either to compete. And players in other kingdoms were disappointed. Now, I spoke to someone in management from LTS, and they more or less said, just simply put, the same thing, right? NA they didn't fight in Zone 3, Zone 4, but they did fight in Zone 2 against SSG, DBB, and IMB. And then I ended up reaching out from NA. So I did speak to a member of management in NA for Nova Ventures. And they initially, I heard that they didn't fight in the FZ due to the same reasons BDO did not capture Necro nor fight in the final zone last season. Now, I'm not privy exactly to the specifics there. And if I did cover it, I am just blanking hard right now. So I'm sure someone will remind us in the comments below. But that was something that they had stated. The other thing they mentioned was that BDO always has double standards, that BDO can give up without any blame, but if NA gives up, they get the blame. I'm not really here to blame anyone. I'm just here to kind of cover what I think is an interesting story and share my opinion and views and my angle, if you will, on how things played out. Now, like I said, I think when you consider the fact that you had a group like, in this case, NA, which is a strong kingdom, right? It's not like they're weak by any means, right? In Kingdom 30. And they don't participate. And then it feels like, because I think someone said LAW and LTS from 119 and 134 were the first ones to go into the final zone. And then YBD from 232 joined. I think someone said maybe this could have been like a couple hours later. And then basically a lot of people were calling out in world chat for NA to participate, and they initially didn't, and then they came in, I think, after YBD. That's what was reported to me. And when you, especially because of how accelerated the final zone is now, with being able to build faster, burn faster, you're getting everything is you're getting to where you need to get to a lot quicker. You're going to be able to start engaging in battles between flags a lot faster, bastions being set up, etc. If you are not going into, I feel, the final zone really is one of those things where like people just have to be ready, right? Now, like I said before, when we read the NA Alliance mail, one of the things mentioned there was that they felt that the pass opening times were not favorable to them. Keep in mind, you have 3 other kingdoms there. And maybe at the same time, some of the pass opening times aren't favorable to any of your opponents. That could also be the case. Maybe, even if the pass opening times are somewhat more favorable to your opponents or to the enemy team versus your team, you also have to consider that eventually the timelines will sync up, unless every single person on the enemy team, once it gets to their off time, is just pulling all-nighters and just jamming energy drinks. Okay, right? That's kind of an asterisk. But the idea is over a 24-hour period, you would imagine everyone's going to get a shot at participating during their peak time. So even if it's starting during your low active window, eventually you will get to your peak active window. And it's very unlikely, to a degree, where if everyone from each team is fighting at full capacity to the best ability they can based on the hour in game and how many people they can field, you will hopefully get a shot at being able to fight during your peak window. So even if it isn't able to come right away once the pass opens, you'll eventually get there. But you absolutely won't get there if you don't participate and fight. Right? So that's the one thing I'll say. And that's not just towards NA, but that's towards any Kingdom and Alliance. Right? It's, again, like I said, I think everyone just wants to see an earnest effort. And it doesn't mean an effort where you're fighting a completely uphill losing battle and you're being asked to just burn every single troop. We're not saying that. What we're saying, however, what we are saying is at least try. And if that looks like you trying for the first 24 hours and just seeing how things go, you never know. Maybe your activity will outweigh their activity. Maybe through better tactics and strategy and skillful gameplay, you'll maybe see some trades from your team to theirs that you thought maybe couldn't happen, but are. Again, there are people that can punch up. And I guess my view on it is just maybe don't deprive everyone else in the KVK of being able to at least see what could be accomplished, right? It's like you're missing 100% of the shots you don't take. So those are my thoughts generally on it. Now, I will play a little devil's advocate here, because the other side of it kind of leans into what Chiz was saying in his video for that second clip, is that he felt disappointed that some people didn't participate. Well, there is a reason to that too. And this goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning of the video, which is trying to get more balanced and more fair matchups. Now, this doesn't mean we're just going to snap our fingers and these things are going to immediately happen. But once again, by increasing the kingdom pool, you will inherently be able to get there that much faster. And it's not going to be an overnight thing, because there's no way that you would be able to necessarily do that if you're thinking about when the game released and you only had, 10, 20, 30 kingdoms. Like, you're not going to get that realistically. You have to wait for more kingdoms to come out. But there are things that you can do, like we touched on before in yesterday's video, which is in addition to adding more kingdoms to the main Gen 1 kingdom pool, to where you can then have more overall teams, and then you have a higher percentage chance of having more fair and balanced matchups. Hopefully this is something that they will continue to do going forward. And then you're going to see less of situations like this happening. But the fact is that, I mean, can you really fault people for seeing a matchup, seeing how it's playing out in other zones, seeing activity levels, comparing that in real time, pulling your own data and comparing it, and coming to a conclusion that is, look, the other team has crazy activity, there's clearly a power advantage, even if we go out and fight, there's just not really any hope of winning. In the same breath, I don't necessarily fault people for opting to not fight a battle where they feel like they can't win. You see, that is the number one golden rule in KVKs, is you have to make sure that everyone feels like they have a chance to win. That is how you're going to make the most amount of money from your game. That's how you're going to elicit the most amount of participation, the most amount of engagement, the most amount of fighting, the most amount of troop loss, etc. Everyone has to feel like they can win against anyone else. And I know that may seem to maybe some people like we're trying to give out trophies to every single kid. That's not the case. What we're talking about is the initial feeling and hope of that anyone part of any kingdom and any team participating, that your team can win just as much as the other team can win. And it's really going to come down to tactics, strategy, true skill, activity, etc. And it's not only going to be in the hands of the power gods, if you will, right, and the credit card warriors out there, which again is not anything against anyone who spends, but I'm sure people understand where I'm going with this, which all comes down to the end goal, which is how do we get KVKs to a point where we can get the most amount of fighting out of everyone that could be fighting that's in that KVK. So listen, that's where I land on this one, right? I can understand Chiz feeling, any emotions as much as anyone on the other side who probably were hoping for a more exciting and more engaging final zone. And I'm sure on the other side, which is on the NA group side, they probably were hoping for that too as well. So for me, I just try and look at it through both lenses because I can understand it through both. But I still would love to hear what you guys think, right? Like I said, I don't have all the facts. I just kind of did some initial queries, and I'm going off of how things look and what Chiz said in his video. So if you have more context, please feel free, right? Maybe we'll cover this again later, but these are my initial thoughts based on what we know so far. Would love to hear from you. That's going to be it for me. As always, until next time, we'll catch you later.